Hi, I'm here with Reverend Dr. Bill Bartlett. He's a Buddhist priest and chaplain supervisor at St. Mary's Regional Medical Center in Reno, Nevada. Reverend Bill, could you tell us something about yourself?
Yes. Hi. I am a chaplain here at a hospital, and also Noel Tiano, my friend, is interviewing me basically because I represent both Buddhism. I'm a mystical Christian, and I'm also a hospital chaplain. And I think the subject matter right now is Buddhism. I have been interested in Buddhism for many years and have been ordained a Buddhist priest for several years in the Jodo Shinshu, or what more commonly is known as a Pure Land Buddhism or Shin Buddhism, which is basically Japanese Buddhism, although it has its roots all the way back in India.
Yeah, tell us the early beginnings of Buddhism, if you would.
Well, I often start by saying that Buddha was a Hindu, just like Jesus was Jewish, and Carl Jung said, "Thank God I'm not a Jungian." I think that in today's vernacular, we might say that the person who we talk of as the historical Buddha was having an existential crisis of despair, and he was trying to make meaning out of his experience of what's commonly called the four sights that he had been sheltered from. That idea of seeing that everyone gets sick, that everyone gets old, or if they're lucky, or everyone dies, and that how do you escape that existential situation? So out of that despair, I think that Siddhartha or Gautama, those are names. Buddha is a term which means the awakened one, drove him essentially to become what we call as the historical Buddha. I say that because in Buddhism, the goal for every sentient being is to become a Buddha. So not to confuse the fact that historical Buddha, the texts say there are as many Buddhas as there are sands in the Ganges River.
Mm. And tell us about the basic tenets of Buddhism.
The basic tenets of Buddhism revolve around the notion of suffering. And that was part of Buddha's existential despair. Why is there, almost as you know in the Hebrew text where Job finally cries out, "Why am I a righteous person to suffer?" The Buddha was asking the same essential question: why is there so much suffering? And he set out on a search, and he even felt that his wife and child would be a burden to his finding that, which is why he named his son Rahula, popular name in India today, but it means hindrance or burden. So he set out on a path to find out, is there a way out of suffering, which becomes the early tenets of Buddhism. Buddhism distinguishes itself by a doctrine called anatman, which meaning there's no individual soul. That's a little bit shocking, usually for our Western ears. Secondly, anicca, which means impermanence, that all things are impermanent. So what Buddha finally comes up with in a way of advice is seek that which does not change. You know, we might have to pause a bit and say, what is that that does not change? That's what Buddha was asking. What is it that doesn't change? What is it that's important? What is it that I'm not going to lose somehow or other? And he recognized in his despair that we lose everything that's important to us. Our wife, our family, our whatever it is that's important to us is impermanent. So he came up with a doctrine known as Pratichut Samuppada, which means not only impermanence, but it means that there's a mutual co-arising that happens. The mutual interdependence, Thich Nhat Hanh, means that interbeing, we are really connected in far greater ways with everything than we recognize.
Very interesting. Well, we hear a lot about, at least here in the U.S., the Dalai Lama and what's happened in Tibet and other South Asian countries. Are there different types of Buddhism?
As you suspect, as you in fact already know, as a student of religions yourself, that there's all, you can say that in every wisdom tradition or world religion, that there's always splinter groups, there's always differences of opinion. Early Buddhism started with something called Theravadan Buddhism. That's one of 19 branches that survived early Buddhism, maybe the only one that survived. Theravadan means way of the elders, but it also has a nickname, Hinayana. Hinayana probably is not so terribly desired by Theravadins as their name, but Hinayana means little bitty ferry boat. It means that to go to yonder shore, which is the goal, to escape suffering, to go to nirvana or the pure land or the non-polluted land, you basically do it yourself, and there's techniques involved in doing it. Now, it may take many, many lifetimes, and it's something that essentially you do yourself. So you might say it's a sort of a works-based Jacob's ladder to get there. But as you can also imagine, within just a few centuries, there began to arise another Buddhism, a bigger Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism. And while Hina means little bitty, Maha means great. So great raft, great ferry boat, where more people can go. Mahayana Buddhism is the bigger Buddhism. Theravadan Buddhism sometimes is called Southern Buddhism. You'll find it in Sri Lanka. Not much Buddhism in India of any sort anymore, with the exception of the Dalai Lama's Dharamsala in northern India. But Laos, Myanmar, which used to be Burma, those southern Buddhists, Thailand, parts of Thailand, where you still see that smaller way of the elders. However, when Buddhism migrated around what's called the Silk Road, and it goes out of northern India and into what we now call Pakistan and Afghanistan, and around north of the Himalaya mountains and into China, over into Tibet, but then around from China into Japan, that's the bigger Buddhism called Mahayana. The difference is that instead of just becoming an arhat, which is then a way to Buddhahood, for me personally, many take a bodhisattva vow. So that bodhisattva means light being. It means an enlightened being who refuses to take full enlightenment until all sentient beings become enlightened. So the goal is helping others. Those bodhisattvas take a goal that until all beings are enlightened, and remember that includes the bumblebees and the grass and all sentient beings that are working their way towards enlightenment or Buddhahood. It's important to say that a lot of people think enlightenment is the goal. Buddhists began to realize that enlightenment is really just the start of the path.
Wow.
And you go from enlightenment to immortality. And that's where the real journey. So even in the Christian doctrine, that was called the doctrine of infinite growth. Gregory of Nyssa, 5th century Cappadocian church father, talked about that. It's like salvation is just a point like enlightenment. It's just a starting point for the journey.
Wow.